Good evening, everyone. And tonight I'm going to be speaking about something that's been kind of speaking towards my heart the last couple of weeks. As we all know, Russia 12 days ago invaded the country of Ukraine there. And first of all, prayers to the Ukrainian people for what they're going through. I've seen stuff recently where now civilians are being attacked. So it's definitely a tragic situation. And prayers to the people of Ukraine, those who want to leave, prayers to them. Secondly, on to what was speaking to my heart here. Quite a few people have been referring to this crisis, so to speak, involving the Russia invading Ukraine there, comparing it to Ezekiel 38, Ezekiel's war. So I'll touch up a little bit on that and offer up some final other thoughts along the way. Okay. So Ezekiel 38 begins with God telling Ezekiel, set your face, and then I'm quoting verse 2 on Ezekiel 38. It says here, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Okay, so Gog, chief prince, sounds like a person, right? Okay, that's what I'm kind of thinking. One thing about Ezekiel's war here involving Gog and Magog, Meshech and Tubal, because those are the main four there, is I've heard for a long time there, a lot of Bible commentators say, okay, it's got to be Russia there. It's got to be that country there. Russia, it's far north from Israel. And that's why we believe that Russia is going to line up with all these other countries here in an unprecedented attack against Israel. But there's also some more recent ones I've heard of that might not be necessarily Russia, it might be Turkey. And later I'll touch on the table of nations there. And Turkey could be involved because of the map there that I've shown a couple of years ago on Facebook and stuff. And if you Google it up, it will show table of nations. Google table of nations, it will show this map here of where the people of Japheth, Ham, and Shem there, where they are all lined up. Okay, so because of that map there, a lot of these nations here, like the Gog, Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, looks like a lot of those, and a couple of others, looks like they're lined up with Turkey. And I am going to say it now, and I will always say this, watch out for both of them. Watch for both Russia, watch out for Turkey, see what they do. Obviously, Putin, he's been the aggressor in this war against Ukraine, but Turkey's president there, he's also been involved as well. He's being more radical and has more Islamic tendencies to go against the grain of freedom and Western views. Okay, so we got Gog, chief prince of Magog, or Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Like I said, could be Russia, could be Turkey, could be both. And it would be stand to reason because of the former Soviet Union, or the Soviet Union, they among the lands that they had are all sorts of stands like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, that type of deal there. And those countries are not that far away from Turkey, so that's a possibility. And obviously God, and then the commands of the Son Man, in this case Ezekiel, verse 3 says, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. For obvious reasons, they're the ones that are kind of plotting this along. They're the ones that are plotting for the demise of Israel. And Genesis 12:3 always says, I will bless those who bless thee, and I will curse those who curses thee. Now, of course, he was referring to Abraham at the time, but Abraham, of course, being the father of the Israelites, that's why those who attack Israel, they're going to end up getting cursed. They're going to end up pretty much meeting their own demise, so to speak. And then the verse 4 here, this is where things kind of start to stick to me a little bit. Okay, so verse 4, I'm using King James, by the way, if you're interested in following along. Verse 4 says, And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed, all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Obviously, no modern nation would just settle for swords and horses and stuff. A lot of nations nowadays, they have all sorts of military equipment like guns, tanks, aircraft, stuff like that. So it's a metaphor, so to speak, of what is going to happen. And I always believe that anything in the Bible, it's either already happened or it's a metaphor of what will happen. Okay? Okay, so the thing that struck me on verse 4, though, is the hooks. Hooks into your jaw there. Okay. What could hooks there? Because it says more than one, right? And this is where, okay, based on what is going on in Russia today, in the war against Ukraine, hooks could be more than one nation. It could be a series of nations there. So Russia's going to be could be drawing to all sorts of conflict, assuming, of course, it is Russia. Anyway, gonna have Gog there, of Magog, being drawn into all sorts of confrontations against all these nations there. And he's going to be brought along. But in this case, against Israel, he's not going to be alone. Verses 5 and 6, we got other nations involved. We got Persia, which is modern day Iran, of course. We got Ethiopia, Put, Gomer, in verse 7 there, will be added. And along with Gomer, we'll join in Togarmah. Okay, now this is verse 7, verses 5 through 7. It's going to be very important, especially in terms of relation to the Table of Nations in Genesis 10, which I will explain. Okay, meanwhile, who are they attacking? They're attacking Israel. Israel, by this time in Ezekiel's prophecy, the land will be restored for war, gathered from many nations. This is the pilgrimage that many nations, for the longest time, Israel went through their own trial and tribulation, where they pretty much were taken out of their land. They had to spread around. They're in various lands around the world. Each of these lands, though, are persecuting them in some form or another. Of course, Holocaust comes to mind. There's also the Tsarist Russian pogroms. You've got the acquisitions from Spain. You got all sorts of issues. You got the Muslims, of course, there, who Islamic religion, they don't like the Jewish people because the Jewish people refuse to convert to Islam. So you got all these nations here. They're spread out all over, and all these nations there don't want them around. And so, eventually, at some point, and this does happen, in fact, it has already happened, Israel, the Jewish people, had to be brought back to Israel. They had to stay in the front. They have to have some sort of homeland. And on May 14th, 1948, this happens. The state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, is born. Obviously, it's not just Jews that are living in Israel nowadays. That's obvious, but the majority of them are. And hence, they finally have a homeland. Now, interestingly, here, verse 8. The remaining days thou, and I'll quote again a verse. The remaining days thou shalt be visited, in the later years thou shalt come to the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, but is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Dwell safely, all of them. Now that's interesting. Think about the history of modern day Israel. Ever since they've been a nation, what have they experienced? They've experienced nothing but war. All the Muslim nations that are surrounding them, they're all willing to attack them. They're all trying to drive them out of existence. So for as long as the modern nation of Israel has been around, they've been at a war. It's kind of interesting there. So hasn't happened yet, but could be a point in time. And in fact, there will be a point in time where there's a relative safety, a relative peace, if you will, for Israel there. They're finally relaxed. They can lay down their arms a little bit, lay down their guard. And of course, this is a deceptive way of thinking. They're deceived into thinking that they're finally safe and in peace. Because of course, what does Israel's enemies do? People like Magog, Gog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Ethiopia, put all these nations here. What are they going to do? They're going to advance, thinking this is a piece of cake. We finally got them. Kind of like how Putin thought Ukraine would be an easy win. And 2 weeks into it, yeah, he's gained some ground, but it doesn't look like he expected the resistance to be as great as it has turned out to be. And he's obviously isolated himself from the rest of the world. Nobody likes the guy anymore. They're trying to do all sorts of embargoes and economic sanctions on him. Okay, so Israel's enemies attack, or they're getting ready to. And the interesting thing is, God and his allies, they could see spoils war, plunder the land, take people captive, and probably kill them. Hence, based on verses 9 through 12 of Ezekiel 38. But those are not the only players here. They're just the ones that are attacking Israel. But we got a couple of others. Sheba and Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish. Again, two more nations, if you will, from Genesis 10's Table of Nations here. Sheba and Dedan, from what I've seen of maps here, they're kind of like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, that area near the Persian Gulf. Tarshish is a little more vague here. A lot of people, some people think it's like Western Europe. Others might even think it's America. America, maybe not. You gotta remember, our nation, USA, is full all sorts of people. We take all sorts of nations in. So that's kind of a little shaky. Possible. Well, we'll have to wait and see, because I also believe this, that all the prophecies that are going to happen, they're not like fully revealed until they actually do. That's my belief. But anyway, Sheba and Dedan and Tarshish, they're on the sidelines there, and they're asking Gog, Magog, and their allies, are you guys taking spoils of war there? What are you guys doing there? But they're on the sidelines. They're not really helping Israel. They're not like attacking Israel, but they're like on the sidelines. And of course, that's pretty much another way of saying, well, we're against Israel, because we're not defending them like we should be. So, in other words, indifference. It's kind of like the Holocaust in the way, where yeah, Germany was the one that really participated and enacted this, but there were a host of other nations that their indifference, their unwillingness to act on behalf of the Jewish people is pretty much the same thing as if they actually committed the act themselves. Okay, and so that verse was verse 13, asking, "Are you guys taking plunder? Are you taking goods and stuff?" Sorry about that. And it actually kind of struck me there because of the situation in Ukraine. Why does it strike me? Because I've seen this thing on Facebook recently about the natural resources that Ukraine has, and it's absolutely remarkable that Ukraine is like top 10 at least in so many categories in terms of metal ores, nuclear ores. You got slate there. You also have all sorts of wheat and produce, all sorts of food there. They're like, if not top 10, at least top 15 worldwide, in not just producing those, but also exporting them. So Ukraine is a very rich nation in terms of natural resources and agriculture. And I believe that's the reason why Russia wants to attack. They want those natural resources. They want the oil, they want the metal ores, they want the agriculture so that they could feed their soldiers and the people. And that's why you attack a nation like Ukraine, for those economic reasons. Otherwise, why would you do it when you know full well the rest of the world's going to try to throw economic sanctions and pretty much alienate you from the rest of the world? And of course, the biggest reason why a lot of commentators thought, okay, it must be Russia. Verse 15 of Ezekiel 38. And thou shalt come from the place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, and a mighty horse. Some Bible verses, some Bibles say it's the remotest part of the earth, but the north part, one nation is the furthest north of Israel, but Russia. And there's that thought as well. But of course, as with all plans against Israel, this one will ultimately fail. And in the end, Gog and his allies will be sent into judgment. And I'm reading a note here that wrote, God will bring about pestilence, bloodshed, torrential rains, and hailstones, fire and sulfur upon Israel's enemies in that day. So they're going to try to attack. They think they got the advantage, but God's got a counter plan. Going to deal with them very swift and very fast. But if you think that's the end of it, well, close. And of course, Gog and his allies, they'll be destroyed. And based on verses 1 through 10, Israel will be sustained for 7 years with, ironically enough, their plunders and their weapons. So the nations that attack Israel, they're trying to seek all these goods and services. They're trying to take people captive, probably destroy the people of Israel. Because Israel right now, they themselves are a very rich nation, especially in terms of agriculture and technology. That's going to entice other nations. They want to get that piece of it. And of course, in the case of the Muslim nations, this is a golden opportunity to finally get rid of the people of Israel. But it's ironic, because they're seeking these goods, they get destroyed. Israel gets the goods. Israel gets the plunder. They get the weapons. And of course, the nation of Gog, given a place for burial in Israel, along with their allies, of course. But here's the ironic thing here. The ironic name that they gave this place. will be given anyway, I should say, because it hasn't happened yet. It's part of prophecy. The valley of the travelers east of the sea. East of the sea. Now, if you're saying the sea, because there's more than one, of course. There's more than one type of ocean. There's more than one type of salt water in the world, of course. What could that be? Well, if you're talking about the sea, what's the biggest sea in the world? What's the one that's closest to Israel? But the Mediterranean. And another name for the Mediterranean Sea, especially in ancient times, they called it the Great Sea. And of course, eventually it would be renamed. This place here will also have another name for it, renamed the Valley of Haman Gog, or the Horde of Gog, verse 11 of Ezekiel 39. Go. And then afterwards, 7 months, Gog, you got all these corpses here, they're just lying around. People of Israel, they got to bury them, prepare the place, cleanse the land. And that's pretty much the end of Ezekiel's war here. But on to Genesis 10, the Table of Nations here. And of course, like Ezekiel 38, there are some along the way. Among Noah's sons, we got Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Japheth is going to be actually the father of a lot of these nations that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38. We got Gomer, we got Magog, we got Tubal, we got Meshech, we got Tarshish, and Togarmah, which is part of Gomer. In fact, if you look it up, Togarmah is actually the son of Gomer. A little interesting tidbit there. So, those are those guys. Mainly, Japheth would be they're going to intersect there with each other anyway, because, of course, Noah's Ark, they get off the Ark on Mount Ararat in Turkey, and, of course, they got to spread out, but, of course, they kind of do intersect along the way. Japheth, the best way to describe it would be mainly Western Asia and Europe, for Japheth's descendants, mainly. Ham, he gets mainly southern Middle East. He gets Europe, or not Europe, but he gets Africa. Sorry about that. And Ham's got some too, though. He's got Put, he's got Sheba and Dedan. So he's got the Saudis, he's got Northern Africa, he's got those. And of course, Shem gets much of Asia. Go from there. And of course, Shem there, later on. Originally, Shem, his descendants were called the Shemites. Sometime later on, they dropped the H. Semites, well, who's Semitic? Among other nations, of course, but the people of Israel. And then, of course, there's a case of Nimrod that I thought of recently. And his is interesting, too. Connection to Iran. Is it possible? Of course, first off, Nimrod was a descendant of Ham through Cush. And of course, he's a mighty warrior. He's kind of like this, a warrior that's ready to rule the world and stuff. He's pretty much the first dictator. And his kingdom starts at Babel, at Erech and Akkad. Mainly, people know him for the Tower of Babel and how that went. Which, of course, is in Iraq. Babel, another name for Babylon. So there's that. But here's one that people don't know. If you look up Genesis 10, though, and concerning Nimrod, here's one people don't think about. They think about mainly Genesis 11 with his Tower of Babel, but After the failure of Babel, he goes on. He goes into Syria. Among other places, he bids Nineveh. And of course, what's interesting there is some Bibles, that I know of at least, they say that he goes away from the land of Egypt into Assyria. That's interesting. Why would he go away from Egypt but to Assyria when Assyria and Babylon are pretty much the same place? In fact, Assyria has nations west of Babylon as well. That's an interesting connection. And then there's another tidbit here, and it involves Abraham's son Ishmael. Ishmael's descendants descend along the area away from Egypt themselves in Assyria. Now, Muslims, they like to say that Ishmael's is their father, pretty much, that they're descendants of Ishmael. So we got the Middle East here, we got Ishmael's descendants. Along the way, if they're living in Assyria, they're probably meeting up with Nimrod's descendants, of course. They got to intermingle, they got to marry, they got to have kids. And it's a very interesting thing because one of the most radically fundamentalist societies of Islam is Iran. So it makes me wonder I'm not saying there definitely is, but it's possible that there could be a connection there between Nimrod and Iran. And that connection would be through Ishmael. Just a little food for thought there. If anyone wants to research that, go right ahead. And of course, in this world gone mad, of course, which was the title of this piece, because let's face it, the last couple of years we got COVID, we got gas prices going up, we got all sorts of crazy stuff going on here. We got protests, we got chaos, we got January 6th, of course.